Hey guys, this is Darin, the Outreach Pastor at Journeys Crossing. I want to talk to you today about a much-needed ministry in the church called the Ministry of Encouragement. It's something that's really needed, I think, during this time that we find ourselves in. And I'm going to point out this Ministry of Encouragement through a character in the New Testament probably most of you haven't heard of. So after the biographies of Jesus, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, comes the book of Acts, which records the primitive history of Christianity. And as you might suspect, some of the major characters get, a lot of the ink in the story. Guys like Peter and John and James, and of course the newcomer Paul. Much of the book of Acts tells the story of these guys' activity, winning people to Christ and so forth. But there's another guy who, again, you probably haven't heard of, whose name appears almost 30 times in the book of Acts, and his name is Barnabas. We meet him in Acts chapter 4, and we learn that his name actually means son of encouragement. And in this case, he really lived out his namesake. In chapter 4, we see that he sold an entire property and gave all the proceeds of that to the early church that they used to distribute the poor, because all the Christians were kind of centered in Jerusalem at that point. And then in Acts chapter 9, he becomes instrumental because this guy named Saul, who we know as Paul, had converted to Christianity, and he was having trouble kind of integrating with the other Christians, especially the big dog disciples like Peter and the others, and for good reason. I mean, he used to kill and persecute Christians, and now he was one. And so the Bible says in Acts chapter 9 that Barnabas literally took hold of Paul and introduced him to the apostles and said, we need to accept this guy, we need to love this guy, he's a brother, and now he's a co-laborer with us. In Acts chapter 11, some Greeks converted to Christianity. In other words, non-Jewish people were converted to Christianity, and so the disciples said, well, let's send Barnabas up there to encourage them in their new faith. So that's an example of Barnabas reaching out to a culture and to an ethnicity that was different than he was. Later in that same chapter, there was a famine in Judea, and the church in Antioch sent Barnabas up to encourage people with an offering from the churches there. In Acts chapters 13 and 14, Barnabas joins Paul. They become the first missionaries, spreading the gospel again to Gentiles, and he was kind of Paul's right-hand man. I mean, he had Paul's back, was an encourager to Paul. Paul could not have done what he did without Barnabas. But then in Acts chapter 15, there's a disagreement between Paul and Barnabas. Apparently they had taken this guy named John Mark along with them on this first missionary journey, and he had failed them. Some suppose that he got malaria or he got sick, but whatever reason, he wasn't able to complete the first missionary journey. It came time for the second missionary journey, and Barnabas said, well, I'll go get John Mark. And Paul said, no, that guy did not do as well. I'm not taking him. And Barnabas said, yeah, we got to take him. The Bible says there was no small disagreement between Paul and Barnabas over this John Mark and his failure. And as it turns out, guess what Barnabas did? He said, okay, Paul, you go ahead and go your way. I'm taking John Mark and we're going somewhere else. And so throughout the book of Acts, we see Barnabas encouraging, people through his generosity, through his, accepting them and helping them get integrated into the life of the church. We see him embracing people who had failed. We see him offering financial help to the churches, and on again. We see Barnabas was an encourager. And so that's what I want to encourage you to be. If you were asking me today to pick a dream team for the church, during this time, pandemic and racial injustice, I'm going to grab some Peter and Pauls for sure. I'm going to grab some evangelists. I'm going to grab some artists. I'm going to grab some pastors. But I'm going to fill my team with a whole lot of Barnabases as well, because that's what people need right now. People need courage. People need to be encouraged, and people need people like you. The beautiful thing about being an encourager, it doesn't take any special spiritual gift. It just takes someone who really cares about the needs of others. So I want to encourage you this week to think about maybe someone who needs their spirit lifted up, someone who needs some financial help, someone who needs a call or a text, or maybe if it's appropriate, even a visit, and be that to them. Be an encourager. It's really what we need the most right now. All right, thanks.